Hello, my name's David Seaman, and this is the Three Lions Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Three Lions Podcast. My name is Russell Osborne and this, as you well know, is an independent England football supporters podcast. I hope I find you well. Hope that you found the recent episodes of interest. There was certainly a lot of love for the chat with Barmy Flags. Likewise, the one with England fan Will Cooper. If you've not heard them yet, they are still available at your podcast provider of choice or threelionspodcast.com. Once again, thanks for joining me. This one, England manager's first game. That's where we're going with this episode. Now, I imagine you could tell me Lee Carsley's first game. You might be able to remember Gareth Southgate's. But if I was to ask you to go back a little further, who would you remember? The manager? The opponents? The scores? The players? You weren't bothered until now. Well, you hadn't thought of it until I asked the question. Well, I am glad you're here because I've put a fair bit of research into this one. Before I start it, I just want to acknowledge both England Stats and England Football Online, both great sources of England information and where I spent a lot of time confirming the research that I'd done. Now, as Thomas Tuchel steps into the role as England manager, he becomes the 21st man to have done so, the 15th in a full-time capacity. He knows his first opponents and no doubt will have been studying up on them, just as he has done so on his own players. We've seen him out and about, haven't we? But what of those before him? How did their first game pan out? Win, lose, draw? Who stood out for them? Who made their debut? Coming up, I'm going to fill you full of facts, figures and stories you can take down the pub or share on your way to a game to impress your mates. Let's start with some of those stats. Now, in 20 games, there have been 14 wins for England managers in their opening match. That's a 70% win rate. There have been 4 defeats for England managers in their opening game. Now, 3 of those were for caretaker managers. The other? Well, we'll come to him fairly soon. And with those 14 wins and 4 defeats, means that there have been 2 games that have been drawn. 11 games have been played at home, 9 away. 11 games have been competitive games of sorts, and 9 have been friendlies. 32 players have made their debuts in an England manager's first game. And unfortunately, for 7, that was their one and only cap. Let's start right at the beginning. Walter Winterbottom. Well, he's a bit of an anomaly. He was England's very first manager, although not in the sense as we know it now. He took charge of the coaching in 1946, but he didn't select the team. This was done by the International Selection Committee and had been since 1872. Basically, a selection of FA suits from across the country who thought they knew better than the man at the helm. So Walter's first game, September 1946, in a coaching capacity, he took England to Belfast, where we beat Ireland 7-2. Now, what was significant about this match was that it was the first official match in 7 years, what with the Second World War having taken place. And because of that, it was a game that saw 9 England players make their debut. Something I'd imagine is unlikely to ever happen again. Something also that has never happened since. A player making his debut scores in the same game as a new manager takes over. Happened in this game. Not once, not twice, but 3 players done so. Wilf Mannion, Tom Finney and Bob Langton all scored in that game. But the 9 debutants back then, Billy Wright, Tom Finney, Frank Swift, Laurie Scott, George Hardwick, Neil Franklin, Henry Cockburn, Wilf Mannion and Bob Langton. Now a year later, and Winterbottom now was appointed officially as England team manager, but still the ISC selected the team. Just couldn't let go, could they? But Winterbottom's first game as manager, and I say that with air quotes, he could now select the tactics and the formation. So September 1947, travelled away to Belgium and came away with a 5-2 victory. Now in total, he oversaw 139 matches. But the key to this episode was that he won his first game. That 7-2 victory over Ireland. Who was next? Alf Ramsey. Appointed in October 1962, initially on a part-time basis for 3 games, as he was still in charge of Ipswich Town. Once again, that team was still being picked by the International Selection Committee. Ramsey's first game was away in Paris, France. England would lose 5-2. So there we go, said at the very beginning, 3 caretaker managers lost their first game and 1 full-time manager. It was Alf Ramsey. But this was a team that went to France that featured the likes of Bobby Moore, Jimmy Greaves and Bobby Charlton, all who would serve him well in his time as England manager. Sadly, it wasn't the start of a long career for Tottenham's Ron Henry, who Ramsey picked. He made his one and only appearance in the game. But after those 3 games as a part-time manager, Ramsey took the job on full-time, and part of the agreement was that he demanded complete control over squad selections. The International Selection Committee was no more. Ramsey left the job in 1974. He was replaced by Joe Mercer on a temporary caretaker basis. He was in consideration for the position on a full-time basis, but really the FA had their eye on someone else, who we'll come to in a moment. But Mercer spent 7 games in the dugout as manager of his country. His first was away to Wales in a British Championship match, winning 2-0 with goals from Stan Bowles and Kevin Keegan. It was also a game that saw the debut of Keith Weller from Leicester City. That man that the FA had their eye on was Don Revie, then manager of Leeds United, who he'd led to great success. Whilst his exit from Leeds was quite the drama, his entrance for England was just how he'd have wanted it. Unlike the 3 managers before him, Revie's first England match was at home, at Wembley, in a Euro 76 qualification match. And whilst we didn't eventually qualify for that tournament, he did get off to a winning start, beating Czechoslovakia 3-0 with goals from Mick Channon and 2 from Colin Bell. And it was this game that he gave debuts to 2 QPR players, Jerry Francis and Dave Thomas. Revie, though, well, he resigned under a cloud 3 years later in 1977 after 29 matches in charge. Next was Ron Greenwood, the former West Ham legend. Greenwood initially took charge in August 1977 on a 3-game temporary basis, just as Ramsey had done 15 odd years before. His first game was a friendly at Wembley against Switzerland. Score 0-0. But in all honesty, England were lucky not to have lost, with Switzerland the better side. And it was a game that Greenwood gave a debut to Liverpool's Terry McDermott, who would go on to win 25 caps. After beating both Luxembourg and Italy in the World Cup qualifiers, he was appointed as permanent manager in December. And his first game, with that added pressure, was away to West Germany. We lost 2-1. But he would, though, take England to the 1982 Spanish World Cup. And despite going unbeaten, we were knocked out in the second round. England came home and Greenwood retired. Bobby Robson was next. And, like Alf Ramsey, Robson came from Ipswich after winning the FA Cup and UEFA Cup. His first match was the beginning of the ultimately unsuccessful campaign to qualify for the French Euros of 1984. His first game, Denmark, away in Copenhagen. It looked like we were heading for a win until a last-minute Jesper Olsen goal tied the game at 2 each. But it was a match that saw the debut of Luton Town's Ricky Hill. Robson would go on to manage 95 England games and become a national treasure. But he bowed out after the 1990 World Cup as the FA, well, they decided not to renew his contract.
It's all over. England begin under Bobby Robson with only a share of the spoils. A dramatic finale, twice in front through Trevor Francis. A scoreline that England certainly can't complain about. Bobby Robson's call for spirits was well answered by his players, but time is surely needed for more refinement of the style. And certainly England struggled defensively throughout, as Jesper Olsen showed in the most dramatic of finales. A final score in Copenhagen. It's Denmark 2, England 2.
Graham Taylor was next. He'd been manager of Aston Villa and guided them back to the First Division at the first attempt. His task was to qualify for the 92 Euros being held in Sweden, and then the 94 World Cup being hosted by the United States. But his first match was home to Hungary at Wembley, a friendly, and a game England would win by a 0-0 thanks to a first-half strike from Gary Lineker. It was a game that Taylor chose not to select any untested players. Of course, England would fail to qualify for the 94 World Cup, and with that, Taylor lost his job.
Fair enough. Well, the crowd at Wembley, who saw Gary Lineker score the only goal of Graham Taylor's first international, the crowd was 51,499, which is a very good turnout for a September friendly, and justified the decision to bring the match from Budapest back to Wembley. The captain marks his first night wearing the armband by scoring the winning goal, and it's worth recording perhaps that Graham Taylor's two predecessors, Bobby Robson and Ron Greenwood, both began life as England manager with a draw. Sir Alf Ramsey started with a defeat, and so Graham joins the late Don Revie and Sir Walter Winterbottom in the list of England managers who've begun their spell in charge with a victory.
The next man to take over in the hot seat was Terry Venables, a man who had been out of managerial work since leaving Tottenham Hotspur in 1993. Now, because England as a country were hosting the Euros of 96, Venables would have the best part of 2 years until he took charge of a competitive match, Switzerland in that tournament. But before that, he had 17 friendlies to negotiate, losing only one, Brazil, in the Umbro Cup of June 95. But what of Venables' first game? Just like Bobby Robson, it was Denmark at Wembley. And whilst Robson's was a draw, Venables' first match in charge resulted in a win, thanks to David Platt. Now, it was a team that featured 3 players selected by Venables to make their debut, who would go on to have differing England careers. They were Graham Lasso, Darren Anderton and Matt Le Tissier. The Euros of '96 came. England were famously a penalty shootout from making the final. But by then, the FA had already decided they were making a change at the top. Venables left as a fan favourite.
Terry, congratulations. That's obviously the start you wanted.
It's exactly what we wanted. It'd been nice if we could have capitalised on 1 or 2 chances, but we're pleased enough. That's good. Get a win, clean sheet, good result.
Anything in particular please you about the performance?
I thought the 2 new boys done particularly well, and it's always pleasing to see youngsters come into a side with that type of confidence and enthusiasm. Always they've got enthusiasm, but to put the confidence with it, it's not always easy. So I was particularly pleased. They looked like they'd played quite a few times before.
The FA's next man was Glenn Hoddle, who had previously been in charge at Swindon Town and Chelsea. Whilst Venables had all those friendlies to begin with, Hoddle, well, he was put straight into it. Operation qualify for the French World Cup of '98. His first match was away to Moldova in a qualifier. England would win 3-0 thanks to goals from Nicky Barmby, Paul Gascoigne and Alan Shearer. Moldova, well, they missed a late penalty, but it was the selection of David Beckham who made his debut and the first of 115 caps that probably caught the attention of most. Although there was another debutant that day, Everton's Andy Hinchcliffe, who would go on to win 7 caps. Hoddle would leave the England post following some unfortunate comments about the disabled in February 1999. This meant that the FA were urgently scrabbling around for a new man to take charge. The FA's technical director of the time, Howard Wilkinson, stepped into the breach as caretaker, and it wouldn't be for the first time. Wilkinson had been in charge of Leeds when they won the League Championship of 1992, and as of this moment, he was the last Englishman to win the top flight in England, which probably explains a fair bit of why we are where we are at the moment with regards to England managers. But what of Wilkinson's first game? Home to then world champions France in a friendly. England would lose 2-0 thanks to 2 goals from rising French star Nicolas Anelka of Arsenal. Wilkinson, well, he chose not to give any debuts out that evening. After the defeat, the FA had found their next man. But Wilkinson, as I say, would return to England's rescue once again. Kevin Keegan was the FA's next choice. Under Hoddle, England had played 3 qualifying matches for Euro 2000. We'd already lost to Sweden, we'd drawn with Bulgaria, and we'd beaten Luxembourg. But we still sat in 3rd place in the qualifying group, behind Poland and Sweden. Keegan came in, initially on a temporary basis, as he was still manager of Fulham. His first game was at home to Poland in March 1999. He gave debuts to both Tottenham's Tim Sherwood and Arsenal's Ray Parlour. But it was Manchester United's Paul Scholes who was the hero, scoring a hat-trick on the day as England won 3-1 at Wembley. Still, as a temporary manager, he took the team to Budapest to draw away to Hungary before he took permanent charge in June. England eventually qualified for the Euros of 2000, which was held between the Netherlands and Belgium, but it was far from a success, departing at the group stage. 2 games later, as qualification for the 2002 World Cup began, and it's October, and England lost at home to Germany in the last game to be hosted at the old Twin Towers of Wembley. And it was there, in the toilets that Keegan resigned.
He's only on loan to the nation, but Kevin Keegan has engineered the change of fortune and mood that English football so badly needed.
The part-time manager's three-line share of the morning headlines will be split with his big-time boy, Paul Scholes, with the 3 goals that have put England back on course.
It is just the start of the repair work. England 3, Poland 1.
The FA, well, once again, they turned to Howard Wilkinson as he stepped in to take the team to Helsinki for a goalless draw a few days later. The search was once again on for a new man. England had lined a friendly up away to Italy in Turin. They wanted to recruit Bobby Robson to take the game, but Newcastle, well, they were cautious about releasing him. Thinking they may lose him to the FA, they refused. So in came Peter Taylor, then manager of Leicester City and former under-21 manager. He agreed to take the team and famously made David Beckham captain and gave a debut to Derby County's Seth Johnson in what would be his one and only cap. Unfortunately for England and Peter Taylor, we lost the game by 1-0. It's now February 2001, and after a lot of controversy and conversations, the FA announced that our new manager would be foreign. In stepped Swede Sven-Göran Eriksson. His first game was a friendly at home to Spain. I say home, it was at Villa Park, as this was the time England were playing on the road whilst Wembley was being rebuilt. Eriksson sadly never took charge of the team at Wembley, which was a shame. But that first game, well, that was a success. A 3-0 win thanks to goals from Nick Barmby, who incidentally had also scored in Glenn Hoddle's first match. Emil Heskey and Ugo Ekiog were the other goal scorers. It was also a match where Eriksson gave debuts to Everton's Michael Ball and Sunderland's Gavin McCann. Sadly, though, for both, that was their one and only cap. Sven, he stepped down after the 2006 World Cup following 3 tournament quarter-final exits.
Good result, good performance, good reception here, Villa Park, very good public, everything's very positive. I'm very, very pleased. And I always said there are many good football players in this country, and I think those who were on the pitch today, they showed it.
Next up was Steve McClaren, previously assistant to Alex Ferguson at Manchester United. He was also a coach for England in Sven's early days. But he moved into management with Middlesbrough, where he spent 5 years, winning the League Cup in 2004. He was never first choice for the FA. That was Brazilian Felipe Scolari, but he turned them down. Also in the running was Sam Allardyce, Alan Kirbishley and Martin O'Neill. But second choice Steve, as he became known, began his role on the 1st of August 2006, with his first game a couple of days later, home to Greece. Now he also appointed former manager Terry Venables as his number 2. The game against Greece, once again, away from Wembley, this time at Old Trafford, where England would win 4-0, thanks to goals from his new captain, John Terry, Frank Lampard, and 2 from Peter Crouch. McClaren's squad featured 3 uncapped players, 2 of which were goalkeepers. Chris Kirkland, who had come on as a second-half substitute for his one and only England cap, and Ben Foster, who would have to wait for his debut. The other uncapped player selected was Tottenham's Michael Dawson. But his big call was the dropping of David Beckham. then of Real Madrid. In fact, of McLaren's 18 matches, Beckham only appeared twice. McLaren, though, he'll be remembered for standing under his umbrella at a wet Wembley as England lost to Croatia, whilst failing to qualify for Euro 2008. For the second time in their history, the FA and England went foreign. This time turning to Italian Fabio Capello, who had previously been in charge at AC Milan, Real Madrid, Roma and Juventus. Could he transfer that overseas domestic experience to the English national team and qualify for the 2010 South Africa World Cup? In a nutshell, yes, but he had his critics. His first game was a friendly, now at the newly reopened Wembley, the same venue and opponent as Ron Greenwood had back in '77, Switzerland. Capello managed to go a step further than Greenwood, winning 2-1 thanks to goals from Jermaine Jenas and Sean Wright-Phillips. Capello, though, didn't give any debuts out in his first game, and from that first game went 10 games unbeaten. But his time with England came to an abrupt end as he resigned in 2012 following a disagreement with the FA over the captaincy of John Terry. Under Capello, England had already qualified for the Euros of 2012, but there was still an urgency to find a manager. We had a friendly lined up against the Netherlands in February 2012 at Wembley. Stuart Pearce, an England legend, stepped forward. England looked to have got themselves back in the game after being 2 down. Goals from Gary Cahill and Ashley Young bringing it level, before Ian Robben won it in the last minute. Pearce, like the managers before him, and those that would follow, gave a debut to a player in his first match. This honour went to Sunderland's Fraser Campbell. He came on as an 80th minute substitute for Danny Welbeck. Unfortunately for Campbell, though, that was his one and only cap.
We learnt that obviously the Dutch are a decent side. They put probably their full hitters out, if you like. I think 1 or 2 of our players played extremely well. I think we need to galvanise maybe a little bit of belief within the group, if I'm being honest, which has probably been lacking before the season in some games, and it's that galvanising that little bit of belief in their ability. We put a lot of young players on the pitch tonight and found out a great deal about them, whether it be me who found that out or obviously the next manager in waiting who's watching it on TV.
This wasn't a position that Pearce was going to take on full time, though. Despite previously being in charge of the under-21s, it was over to someone else. That man was Roy Hodgson. In fact, the first manager the FA had brought in with previous international experience. He had previously been in charge of Switzerland, the United Arab Emirates and Finland. He was tasked with ensuring we had a good Euro 2012. In his defence, he didn't have long to get going, but we negotiated the group before exiting to Italy in the quarter-finals. But first was a friendly away in Norway. An Ashley Young goal divided the teams as England came away with a 1-0 victory in May 2012. Hodgson would go on to manage England 56 times. He took us to the Brazil World Cup and the Euros of 2016 in France. That ended at the hands of Iceland, where he resigned with immediate effect. But back to that Norway game. 2 players have Hodgson to thank for giving them their England debuts. Both from the bench, Arsenal's Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain, who would go on to win 35 caps, and Liverpool's Martin Kelly, who didn't win as many, made his one and only appearance as an 88th minute sub. This, at the time, was the shortest England career, until 2018, when Nathaniel Chalobah came on as a sub in the 90th minute, and he's not been seen since.
I think the discipline of the team. I think the obvious desire of all the players to really work hard for each other and to make certain we did come away with a victory. We got off to a good start with the early goal, but after that we had to withstand quite a lot of pressure from the Norwegian team, at least in terms of ball possession. But I thought we kept our shape very well. I thought that we worked very hard, and if we're going to criticise ourselves, it will be that we could have maybe done a little bit more on occasion with the counter-attacking chances that we had. We did produce a couple of shots which hit the post and a couple of good saves from the keeper, but occasionally, after winning the ball back, after defending so well, we had some great opportunities on the break.
So once again, familiar territory for the FA. The search was once again on. Sam Allardyce had previously interviewed for the position back in 2006 with his PowerPoint presentation, but that time he lost out to Steve McLaren. This time, despite names such as Gareth Southgate, Arsene Wenger, Eddie Howe and Brendan Rodgers all being in the frame, Allardyce landed his dream job and was tasked with qualification for the 2018 Russian World Cup. Now we all know how this ended. 67 days in the job, he landed himself in hot water. But in that time, he became the only England manager to have a 100% win record. Who knows if that will ever be equalled. But that one game came in September 2016, away to Slovakia, in a hard-fought game where the Slovaks were reduced to 10 and Theo Walcott had had a goal chalked off. It took a last-minute Adam Lallana goal to make sure we came away with all 3 points. He left a couple of weeks later after his contract was terminated. Now his team didn't feature any debutants, but the squad had 2 players who were uncapped. West Ham's Michael Antonio and goalkeeper Alex McCarthy, who went on to make just the one appearance under Gareth Southgate.
Well, Sam, many congratulations on your first win as England manager. How did it feel at the end of that game?
Well, that's huge relief, let's face it. In my position, not beating 10 men here would have been a little or a big knockback for me. And I think that on the balance of the game, we were more than good enough to have won by more than good enough to have beat 11 v 11, but didn't. But finally beat 10 v 11. On the basis we broke down what was a very stubborn defence in the end by keeping believing, and going right to the very, very end. I think tonight's heat was obviously difficult for the players. They were bound to tire, so I think the introduction of the 3 subs, particularly when they went down to 10 men, gave us a little bit more zip in the stride because they were fresh. That put more pressure on their defence, and finally, in the end, their defence cracked. We've won 1-0, and Adam Lallana scored his first goal for England, so well done on him. For me, at the other end, a clean sheet. If we go many, many games without conceding a goal and being defensively sound as we were tonight, we could have a good run of games in the near future.
Now it's fair to say the FA weren't expecting to be hunting once again so quickly. Who and where would they turn to? Whatever and whoever, they didn't have long, as Malta were due at Wembley in early October. After originally turning the position down, the under-21 manager Gareth Southgate agreed to take the job on a 4-match interim basis. And it began with that Malta game at Wembley. Few England managers have had an easier start, I think it's fair to say. As expected, we won by 2-0, with those coming from Daniel Sturridge and Dele Alli. They also gave a debut to Manchester United's Jesse Lingard, who went on to make 32 appearances for England. And after those 4 matches, all undefeated, he agreed to take permanent charge. And he took the team on a journey few will forget. But it ended after a second European final defeat, this time at the hands of Spain in Berlin. It was too much, and Gareth resigned a couple of days later.
Gareth, 2-0 against Malta here at Wembley. Your assessment of the game, first of all?
I thought first half we played particularly well. Moved the ball well, created a lot of chances. goalkeeper made a couple of really good saves, and second half we also had more chances to have made this scoreline more comfortable and a little bit more exciting for the supporters. But we were always in total control of the game, and I thought there were several very good individual performances, and there's plenty for us to build on from today.
Who do you pick out as being the best performance tonight?
Well, I was really pleased for Jesse Lingard. I think he was bright throughout the game. I thought he linked play between the lines really well. His creativity and his individuality was excellent. He worked incredibly hard for the team and probably just missed out on capping it with a goal, really.
And how have you enjoyed the week building up to it? You're obviously excited about it before, but it seems that you've really taken to it over the course of the week.
Yeah, I've thoroughly enjoyed it. They're a really good group of players to work with, and there's something building within them. They're very young, and there's a lot of time for them to develop, but I think they can be really exciting over the next couple of years.
After turning to the under-21s manager with Gareth Southgate, the FA once again did the same. This time with Lee Carsley, who had won the under-21 Euros in 2023, beating Spain. To many, it seemed a logical and positive choice, although it was always on an interim basis. Carsley, despite being born in England, had previously represented the Republic of Ireland, and as fate would have it, his first match took him to Dublin in a Nations League game against the Irish. 2 goals from Declan Rice and Jack Grealish, which has its own backstory, meant that Carsley became the 14th England manager to win their opening match. It could be said that the game was overshadowed somewhat from his perspective with his refusal to sing the national anthem, this for his own personal reasons. But Lee Carsley would take control of 6 matches, one short of Joe Mercer's 7. This before the FA announced the appointment of German Thomas Tuchel on an 18-month contract. We've spoken about debutants that England managers have given. Lee Carsley, he gave 2 in that first game, Morgan Gibbs-White and Angel Gomez.
How do you sum up your first match as England interim manager?
I thought it was good in parts. I think you've seen some of the things that we've tried to do. I think the lads have got to take a lot of credit, well, all of the credit. I think we've showed that we've got some real talent, and we can be really pleased with the clean sheet as well.
As a returning former Irish player, what do you make of Rice and Grealish getting the goals?
Well, I thought they both took their goals really well. Really well worked moves, and they're brilliant finishes. And I think they can both, moving forward, score a lot more goals and add goals to their game.
So here we are. What of Thomas Tuchel? Well, obviously he's not had his first England game as yet. That comes on the 21st of March at home to Albania. A game, it's fair to say, he and the vast majority of England fans will be confident of winning, although as we know, this is football. Anything can happen. So what do we have to go on? Well, frankly, what I'm going to say has no real relevance to this upcoming game, but let's take a quick look over his first games as a domestic coach from his 5 previous club sides. Now, 2009, he was in charge at Mainz. In a home game against Bayer Leverkusen, they drew 2-2. They moved on to Borussia Dortmund in 2015. His first game was away to Wolfsberger, an Austrian side, in a Europa League qualifier. Dortmund won that by a 0-0. In total, he had 3 qualifiers, of which all were won before his first Bundesliga match, which was at home to Borussia Mönchengladbach. That was won 4-0. 2018, he moved to PSG in France, Paris Saint-Germain. They beat Monaco 4-0 in the, I guess it's the French equivalent of the Community Shield. They then went on to beat Caen 3-0 at home in Ligue 1. as we all know, he came to England. He came to manage Chelsea in 2021. This game was played at Stamford Bridge. It was against Wolves. It ended 0-0, but it was a match that at the time saw a record 78.9 possession for his side and also featured 820 passes. Something I imagine, well, we're going to see a lot of in the next 18 months. And then 2023, his most recent domestic side he took charge of. His first game for Bayern Munich was at home in the Allianz Arena. Won it 4-2 against his former side, Borussia Dortmund, in the Bundesliga. So 3 wins, 2 draws. It's all pointing in a quite positive direction for Thomas Tuchel and that first England game. But who knows? I told you there'd be lots of little pieces of information you could take from all of those first games from our England managers. Thank you very much for joining me. I hope you've enjoyed it. Let me know what you think. You can find me over on social media, all the usual places. Just search 3 Lions Podcast. Send me a message, or you can email me as well, 3lionspodcast@gmail.com. And as I've mentioned before, there is the Ko-fi account. Should you want to contribute to the hosting of the show, you can do that as well. Any contributions are gratefully received. Head to kofi.com/3 Lions Podcast. ko-fi.com/3 Lions Podcast. Those games, well, they're getting closer. We've still got a good 6 weeks to go. And between then and now, I'll be putting some more England content your way. I hope you can join me for it. So until then, take care of yourselves. Cheers.